A girl awakens in her bed hidden behind a blanket in the Empire's grand celebration, when people assemble in the streets all night. Ilran flushes as she realizes she's naked, her thoughts racing with memories of how she ended up here in this strange situation. 12 hours before amidst the festivities and the flowing wine, she enjoyed the fun with her companions. Her companions encourage her to drink more, pushing her to her limits. Among their banter, one of her friends mentioned individuals who promised allegiance to the Emperor, declaring they would join him hereafter. Confused, Ilran inquired innocently about the harm she had done, only to be confronted with the charge that her comments had tarnished the Emperor's name. Angered, she rose, about to leave, but her companions begged her to stay a little longer. She exited the house amidst a sea of adorned buildings and a brilliant full moon overhead, with deep apologies. Her mood changed instantly, and she was overcome with a delight she had not felt in a long time. She danced with the crowd, joining hands with a stranger and encouraging him to join in the fun by her side. She eventually found herself in his home, dozing off. As she rises from the bed, pain shooting through her body, she cast a glimpse at the man sleeping in an adjacent room, thinking that she'd been persuaded he was more attractive. Her gaze is drawn to the man's neck, decorated with a necklace of amaranth, the fabled jewelry fashioned by the disappeared artist. Its owner, the last survivor of the royal family, was the object of Emperor Karat's fury, having eliminated every other member and harboring contempt for everyone who clung to him, even those wanting a single night of passion. Ilran decides to escape the premises. Her relief is obvious upon her return home. She leaves her home to prepare for work, passing through the hallways of the Emperor's palace, when her chatty friend Sun Baimin interrupts her, inquiring about the happenings of the festival night and questioning her early departure. Sun Baimin's chattiness irritates Iran. The arrival of Captain Leonhardt, the revered commander of the Crescent Duchy and the youngest captain, puts an end to the chit-chat. He warns Sunbum that their first mission is to protect the Majesty and not to engage in frivolous chat. Then, turning to Iran, Leonhardt invites her to follow him to the king's presence. Fear of being detected en route, Iran agrees to accompany Leonhardt to face the magnificence. When they arrive, Emperor Karat swivels his focus towards them, inquiring about the happenings of the festival's final night, and their thoughts on personal interactions between a man and a woman on such an occasion. This unexpected question catches them unprepared. Nonetheless, Leonhardt strongly states that there is no impropriety as long as mutual consent exists. The king then requests Ilran's opinion, which causes her thoughts to rush as she wonders if he has discovered her secret. Struggling to find an appropriate explanation, she eventually asserts that such relationships are formed through interwoven hearts, despite the king's preference for restricted physical contact before marriage. The king dismisses them with a smile, and as they leave the room, Ilran breathes a sigh of relief, grateful for her near escape. Meanwhile, sat in his regal chair, the king's reflection mirrored in his tea, wearing a knowing grin, repeating Ilran's words, "Connected hearts." Leon approaches Ilran while in a state of bewilderment and inquires about the nature of her worried demeanor. Ilran diverts attention away from his worry by bringing up the peculiar questions posed by the king and musing aloud about the king's recent shift in behavior. Leon demonstrates his comprehension by nodding and moving away after hearing her response. After a few months, Ilran begins to suffer from excruciating headaches and realizes that she has not had her monthly cycle. She reasons that it's due to stress and mulls over going to a doctor, but ultimately decides that the discretion and safety offered by the Black Alley doctor are more important to her. She wears her black coat before going to the doctor's office to make an appointment. She considers the potential that her delayed period may not be primarily due to stress, and she does it while seated in an examination chair. She thinks about the possibility of alternate causes. Because she's concerned for her safety, she decides to go this covert route rather than visit a traditional clinic. The physician starts by asking the patient about her symptoms and then instructs her to remove some of her clothing, so that he can examine her more thoroughly. She opens up about her predicament, including specifics of the evening during the festival. After performing a meticulous examination on Iran using a stethoscope, the physician makes a startling discovery and informs her that she's expecting a child. As the months pass, Ilran is left feeling overpowered by the information that was revealed to her, and as a result, he becomes increasingly weak and occasionally throws up. When she's in the same room as the king, her heart beats quickly because she's terrified that he will discover the truth. While Leon is accompanying her into the palace corridor, he shows concern for her health, to which she responds by dismissing it as a simple case of seasonal sickness. Leon, unconvinced, proposes that she see a doctor who practices in his neighborhood. However, Ilran believes that her physician is sufficient and she avoids his subject. Leon brings up the forthcoming inquiry session as the conversation shifts gears and asks her whether she's ready. Ilran, intrigued, questions the inquiry that will take place in a few weeks. Leon explains that the higher authorities have postponed the investigation dates and he allows her to withdraw from the process if she feels ill. Elrond is unyielding in its insistence that she will be there for the investigation. Leon checks with the commander to see whether all soldiers are present as they congregate in the large hall. The commander affirms that they are ready and states that they may begin the assembling now that the final group has arrived. Leon inquires Elrond once more about the cause of her condition after noticing that her skin is quite pale. However, she provides the same explanation each time. During their discussion, they enter the king's chamber and find him seated in his chair, intently reading a rumor circulating throughout the city. The king himself has propagated this rumor, therefore it's likely that he is the source of it. Elrond's discomfort increases when the cook serves grilled meat for the king to consume while Elrond is standing next to the king. Seeing it makes her feel queasy and she struggles to control the impulse to throw up, while desperately trying to keep her mouth closed. She knows that any sign of illness before the king could mean danger, so she averts her gaze as the cook brings tangerines. The sight of the tangerines causes her tremendous cravings for them, but she does not dare ask for a piece of them. She has decided to give up, and while making arrangements to buy tangerines on her way home, she suddenly realized that the fruit was out of season and would be prohibitively expensive. While she's preoccupied with the fruit, her stomach begins to grumble, drawing the notice of the king, who's standing very close to her. She takes a deep breath and rests her hands on the king's shoulder, only to immediately realize that she's done something wrong. She then falls to her knees and begs for forgiveness. At this point, the king goes to Leon and asks why he is not ensured that his knights have sufficient food to eat. Elrond jumps in and argues that it's not the captain's responsibility but her own because she was motivated by personal concerns. Although the king orders Leon to leave the room, Leon initially refuses to obey the order. The monarch warns him that his statements will not be repeated, ultimately resulting in Leon leaving the kingdom. Now that he and Elrond are alone, the king questions her about why she's put her health to the side while participating in the Empire's duties. Elrond shares that she's put on weight recently and decided to lose part of it. The king reprimands her and emphasizes that she should not let her outward appearance affect her performance as a knight. After receiving a nod of assent from her, the king motions to an empty chair close by and invites her to join him there. She initially balks, but in the end she agrees to comply. The monarch makes a request for food for Elrond, at which point the chef is called, and several different foods such as pudding, pizza, and fresh juices are served in front of her. Because he realized that she must have been starving for days, he insists that she eat the meal offered to her. Elrond, upset by the smell, fights off the impulse to throw up and avoids eating. However, out of worry that the monarch may suspect her, she grudgingly starts eating to dispel any uncertainties that he might have. Fearing the king's inspection, Elrond reluctantly decides to consume part of the meal. She forced herself to eat, aware that the king's stare stayed fixated on her, refusing to abandon her until she finished her meal. Leon enters the room just as she struggles with the food, falling to his knees and begging the king for pardon for abandoning his knights. Elrond is perplexed by Leon's behavior because she believes her illness is entirely to blame for her worsening health. Leon approaches Elrond and begs her for forgiveness, admitting that he should have seen her deteriorating condition. The king mulls over the problem, noting that if any of his knights become ill, they must seek prompt treatment from the royal physician. Elrond is then instructed to accompany him to the royal clinic. Time passes and Elrond lies on a bed while the king waits for the physician nearby. Fear fills her as she fears her secret will be revealed with no possibility of salvation. The physician enters the room unexpectedly until Elrond's surprise, it's the same doctor from the back alley. After initially exploring the idea of a twin brother, she realizes it is the same physician. She needs clarification on how a royal physician can operate a separate clinic in a back alley while still being required in the palace. Her thoughts are interrupted when the doctor begins to examine her. He notifies the king of the findings of the examination. Elrond closes her eyes, unable to muster to hear the truth. The physician informs the king that Elrond has slight food poisoning and acute indigestion, most likely due to eating something rotten on festival night. Elrond agrees, marveling at how the doctor lies to protect her in front of the monarch. The monarch instructs his chef to prepare the required diet for his knight, expressing his displeasure at having any sick members in his army. Elrond devours the meal like a wild beast in a ferocious state, briefly forgetting the king's presence. She quickly stops eating and looks at the king, realizing her impropriety. Before leaving the room, the king rises and tells her to take better care of herself. The cook observes that she barely saw the king staring at them and that it is the first time she's seen him grin. Elrond seeks consolation in the royal bed, hoping to sleep, but her mind wanders back to another time when the king smiled, when they were close and he shouted out someone's name. She shakes her head, unable to recollect what word he said, attempting to ignore the memories and drift into oblivion. However, the king enters the room discreetly while she's sleeping. The scene proceeds with the king sitting on the bed next to Elrond and playing with the strands of her hair. Ilran is jolted awake by his presence, and she quickly concludes that it must be impossible for the king to be in her room, believing it must be a dream instead. She's startled by his presence. She tries to fall back asleep by closing her eyes, but the king continues his act, this time with a smile on his face. She eventually gives up and succumbs to sleep. Ilran wakes up and sits up, expressing her skepticism and wondering aloud how the king could visit her in her dreams. In answer, he tenderly touches her chin while gazing into her eyes and admits that he's been thinking about her a lot. When Ilran finally opens her eyes, she finds that she's been dreaming the entire time. A few days later, Ilran tells Leon that she's concluded that the king is a terrible man, while walking together in the corridor. Leon nods in agreement and acknowledges that it would be unreasonable to expect compassion from him. Nevertheless, he notes that the king appears to have a soft place for Ilran. As they make their way back to the king's chambers, they continue to carry on their discussion. The monarch inquires about the responsibilities he bestowed upon them, and both respond positively. The monarch interviews them to learn why they've gathered together despite having varied roles to play in the kingdom. Amid their journey to see His Majesty, Leon improvises a story in which they say they ran into each other by chance. The king is content with the explanation, so he orders Leon to return to his post, and Leon complies with the instruction. Soon after, a lady walks in and tells the king that Baron Fabian's daughter wants to talk with him. She does this as soon as she enters the chamber. Because he's deeply involved in what he's reading, the monarch requests that the woman waits without looking at him. After waiting a while, he and Ilran entered the guest room. When the Baron's daughter stood up to speak, the monarch cut her off and demanded that she get right to the point. The Baron's daughter was attempting to introduce herself. She added that the king had ordered her to find the girl he'd spent the night with during the celebration, but owing to the darkness, no one remembers her identity or the qualities that distinguish her from the others. After a brief pause, she gives a sly smile before revealing that she was the one who spent the previous night with the monarch. Ilran is left standing there, bewildered by the girl's blatant falsehood, while the king's look suddenly takes on an odd quality. The girl was to be evacuated from the palace immediately, and the king left the chamber without saying a word as he turned his head and started walking out of the room. Walking alongside the king at the time, Ilran makes the most of the chance by asking him what he would do if he found out that the woman with whom he had spent the night was pregnant. The monarch takes a moment to pause and looks at the girl before adamantly declaring that a scenario like that would never happen, and labeling the child's assertion as a fabrication. While he moves forward, Ilran stays put, her hand resting on her stomach as she thinks about the possibility that the truth will never be revealed. He keeps moving forward. Thank you so much for watching. Please check out these other videos and make sure to subscribe and press that bell icon to know about our latest videos.